Who is Genghis Khan? Let us begin with his parents. His mother, Oylun, was kidnapped before Genghis Khan was born. As a newlywed, she travelled with her husband, Chiled, through the steppe on their way to his homeland. And it was during this travel that a solitary horseman spotted them as they travelled through the isolated mountain valleys. The horseman, too poor to afford to marry such a woman like Oylun, decided to obtain her as a wife by kidnapping her instead, which was quite a common practice of those who lived in the steppe. So he rushed back towards his camp to seek help from his brothers. As the three brothers swooped down towards the couple, Chiled tried his best to protect Oylun by galloping towards the attackers, but it was of no avail. Oylun, seeing that there was no chance in escaping the attackers, decided, in an ironic show of bravery, that she surrenders to her kidnappers, giving her husband an opportunity to escape, knowing that it was her that they were after and not him. If they both attempted to escape, it would mean that they are both caught and Chiled killed. And in this moment, she told him such words of compassion that no lover would ever want to hear. She said, "If you but live, there will be maidens for you on every front and in every cart. You can find another woman to be your bride, and you can call her Oylun in place of me." Chiled, struck with shock from what he had just heard, watched as she slipped out of her blouse and thrust it into his face as a parting gesture, commanding him to flee. "Take this with you, so that you may have the smell of me with you as you go." Chiled fled, taking the blouse with him as a reminder of her love. Clutching it towards his face, he constantly turned back to look at her, and Oylun watched as he rode over the pass to slip forever from her sight. So full of emotion, Oylun screamed so loudly that it is said that she stirred up the river and shook the woods and valley. Within no time, her captors arrived, and she is taken as a wife to her kidnapper and new husband, known as Yasuge, of the band that would one day be known as the Mongols. Oylun's new home was not like what she was used to. Prior to her capture, she lived a lavish life in the vast open grasslands of the steppe, where great herds of horses, cows, sheep and goats grazed and grew fat during the summer. This was in contrast to the northern edge of the steppe, where there was not enough grassland to feed large herds of animals. She was forced to get accustomed to eat harsher hunters' foods such as marmots, rats, birds, fish, and the occasional deer or antelope. The climate in the north of the steppe was not promising either. The winters were harsh and food would be scarce. This resulted in the tribesmen to be tough and ruthless, where they would rely on raiding and stealing to acquire food, goods, and even women. This is the environment where Genghis Khan was soon to be born and raised. Genghis Khan was born near the border of modern Mongolia and Siberia in 1162. Genghis Khan's father, Yasuge, named him Temujin. He was named after a warrior that Yasuge killed, named Temujin Ug, while on a campaign against an enemy tribe during the birth of his son. Temujin was to grow up in the harshest of environments. The Mongols lived at the northern edge of the steppe, at the juncture between steppe and the northern Siberian forest. They would eat what they hunted in the forest and whatever little they could herd from open grasslands of the steppe. They had very little to trade with the trade caravans and often raided them instead. During the winter, food would become even more scarce, and they would have years where there would be little to no food. And for this reason, raiding people and nearby tribes was seen as just another days of work. In addition to his harsh environments, the small community he grew up in seen him and his mother as no more than just extra baggage. His own father did not value him. In one occasion, his father actually accidentally left him behind when he moved to another camp, only to be reunited later due to another chief of a different clan finding him and returning him to his family. Yasuge eventually died after being poisoned by one of the kinsmen of Temujin Ug, the warrior he had killed, after whom he had named his son. He died with 2 wives and 7 children, all under the age of 10. The clan with which they lived decided to no longer support the 2 widows and their children, since they did not possess any real kinship with them. And with Yasuge out of the picture, they felt no obligation to help them. And so, when the camp intended to move, as is the practice of the nomadic tribes of the steppe, they did so, leaving behind Temujin and his family. The family, alone, with no hunters to feed them and 7 young children to look after, had no chance of survival. But against all odds, Oilun, the strong-willed mother, a once terrified and helpless kidnapped young girl, took matters into her own hands and did not accept defeat. She began traveling up and down the river every day to find food, fruits and plants that grew along the river for the children and her ex-co-wife. Temujin too began hunting small animals like rats with wooden arrows that he had crafted tipped with sharpened bones. And the family, who prior were destined to starve, survived. The harsh circumstances forced him to take matters into his own hands. The abandonment of his tribe caused him to only rely on trustworthy allies, and it also showed him the importance of having allies. Genghis Khan's life is definitely one of humble beginnings. An outcasted child with no allies and no support, killing and eating whatever moving thing he found, and wearing its skin as clothing. Living like true animals, life could not get any lower than that. How is it that this little boy was to one day grow up to impact the entire world? Temujin had an elder half-brother named Begta, and as is the custom of the Mongols, Begta being the eldest assumed power over the family. It was Temujin's duty to obey whatever Begta instructed. This resulted in a rivalry that grew between him and Temujin. As they grew older, their rivalry only got worse. Begta, having no blood ties with Temujin's mother Oilun, possessed the right to marry her when he comes of age. This realization did not sit well with Temujin, and the fact that his own mother sided with Begta in matters only added fuel to the fire. And so, in a planned assassination, when Begta was alone, sitting cross-legged upon a hill overlooking the steppe, Temujin creeped up behind him and his younger brother, Khazar, in front of him, using the tall grass as camouflage. With their bows drawn, they pounced up, aiming their arrows at the target, ready to fire like a hunter ready to stick his prey. But Begta stayed calm. He did not even flinch. As if he was expecting it, he remained seated and explained to his brothers that he is not their enemy, and instead they should be worrying about the Taichut clan, the ones that abandoned them and left their family to starve. But seeing no hope in swaying them from their purpose, he made a final request that they spare his younger brother's life, Belguti. Each keeping their distance, they silently ended the life of their half-brother, saying not a single word, and each walked away with not a single sign of remorse on their faces, leaving him behind to die alone. Temujin now had become head of the family. This display of dominance encapsulates perfectly what would become a very distinct characteristic of Temujin. He would go against customs and traditional modes of behavior in order to get what he wanted, even if it meant to kill a member of his own family. When the Taichut clans came to know of what he had done, they sent a band of warriors to punish him. They captured him and took him back to their camp and strapped him into a kang, a device that until recent years was used in parts of Asia for public humiliation and corporal punishment. While bound to the kang, he was able to walk but unable to use his hands, preventing him from feeding himself or even getting a drink of water. The Taichut clan gave Temujin to their servant families as a prisoner to assume responsibility over him. While living with these servant families, he observed that, unlike the people of the Taichud clan, they were kind to him and they did not treat him as worthless. Instead, they went as far as breaking the rule by removing the Kang at night, just so that he could sleep comfortably. Seeing this changed Temujin's perspective of people. Until now, he did not trust anyone who was not his family. But seeing how these low-status families treated him changed that. He realized that although these people were not related to him in any way, they were good to him. But the Taichuds, even though they shared ancestors, did not even treat him like a human. He observed that those of high ranks, although closer in kinship, could not be trusted, and that those who were outside of kinship and of low status can sometimes be trusted. This led to him, later in life, to judge people by their actions towards him and not their relation to him. Temujin remained a slave for perhaps 10 years until one day he saw the perfect opportunity to flee. The tribesmen were drunk while Temujin was being supervised by an incompetent boy. He swung his Kang and knocked out the boy, and instead of escaping, he hid in a pile of wheat. As the tribesmen sent out a search party to look for him, he was spotted by one of the servant men and was advised to flee at night. Instead, he entered the house of the man, putting him and his family at risk. They took off the Kang and burned it and hid him in a pile of wool. They then cooked up some food for him and gave him a horse to be on his way. They did all this while being poor and while they were at potential danger of being killed. Free at last, Temujin reunited with his family, and for the next couple of years he and his family lived as outcasts. With no protection or allies, weak and vulnerable, they remained constantly on the move, avoiding any conflict. Stay tuned for part 2 to find out how Genghis Khan began his quest to attract his own followers and how he began building his own tribe and eventually uniting all the Mongols of the steppe.